Welcome to the Stay or Go podcast, where we're changing the dialogue around divorce so that no woman ever stays in her marriage out of fear. Get ready to dispel myths, learn life-changing tools, and build a solid foundation in yourself from which to make your decision. And now your host, me, Britta Jo. Hello, babes. Welcome back to the podcast this week. Before we dive into today's episode, which as you can tell from the title, may be a little bit activating for a lot of you. Sometimes when we think about actually having the conversation with our spouse, it can be a little bit dysregulating. I wanted to just take some deep breaths here at the start as we've been doing our 2 months of focusing on regulation over in the Stay or Go community. I too have been noticing conversations or topics that are activating for me and trying to do a little better at just slowing down, letting my heart rate drop, taking some deeper breaths, realizing I've got time, allowing myself to be supported while I move into things that are also big and activating for me in my own way. So this episode as well, maybe that for you. So please remember to breathe throughout all of it as we talk about something that's a very, very important topic and something that honestly when I started writing this episode, I was like, I cannot believe I have not done a podcast on this yet. Just such a testament to my immense gratitude for those of you listening that reach out and email me, because this episode comes directly from an email that I got this week, actually. So I'm going to call her Kay, and I'm going to read her email to you guys here at the start so you can kind of know what prompted and brought forward all of this beautiful episode ahead. So she said, "Hey, Britta, this episode hit home for me." And she was referencing episode 117, the Leaving a Good Guy with Deep Wounds one. She says, "I have been listening to your podcast for months now. I am trying to build the calm and strength to have the conversation with my husband. At the end of this episode, you mention that a future episode will center around how to have that breakup conversation. I am really waiting on pins and needles for that episode. I have come to the decision to leave. I just need help with that conversation. I hate conflict and have been suffering in a marriage that just isn't working because I avoid conflict at all costs. I would love help with wording and how to stay calm. Thank you for the guidance you provide women you don't even know you have reached." Oof. Hello, Kay. From everybody here on the podcast who I believe you are giving words to their own experience, thank you so much for taking the time to send me this personal email. And my ADHD side is especially grateful because as I was reading that email, I was like, oh my God, I did say that. Thank you so much. I need to make sure when I'm recording episodes and I say something like that I'm jotting down a note or something to remind me, come back, make this episode. So I knew when I read your email this week, I was like, okay, if I don't do this now, I'm probably going to forget, or, I need to put this in a document. And it just worked out perfectly as I sat with the idea. I was like, this is the perfect time to do this. I think especially too, I've heard a lot of feedback in the Stay or Go community this week about last week's episode, all about your motherfucking no. And I think this is a beautiful episode to emerge out of that one as well. It's kind of in this same vein of realizing, coming from a world built by and for men, we as women have to go into situations advocating for ourselves. And especially when we are going into a situation advocating for something that our spouse may not want, right? In the case of a separation, in a divorce, I want you to be prepared. And with that in mind, the way I'm going to do this episode is I will tell you a brief outline of how I think a conversation around this topic is best done, but I'm going to prep you with a few things that I think are really important before we go there. And one of the things I want to come straight out the gate with on this episode is coming back to Kay's email. And as soon as I read it, there were a couple phrases. This is my coach brain that's been honed over thousands and thousands of hours of coaching women on this topic. There were a couple things she said that I was like, oh, these are sending off bells for me. So I want to point these out because this episode is really specifically for women that are experiencing these feelings around this conversation. So anytime a woman is telling me about a conversation that she wants to have with her spouse, and she is telling me that she hates conflict, that she is staying in her marriage because she avoids conflict, and that she wants help with wording and staying calm, those are all signals to me that there's probably an emotionally immature partner on her end. Okay? Because if not, if there isn't an emotionally immature partner that she's having to deal with, she's not going to be presenting to me as worried about these things. She's not going to be as worried about there being conflict. When you know that your partner can listen respectfully, when you know that your partner is able to hear you, when you know that your partner can see you as a separate individual and realizes that you get to make decisions that are right for you that they might not agree with, you're not as worried about the wording. You're not as worried about things staying calm, and you're not as worried that there's going to be conflict. Now, I want to offer that if you had a partner like this, right, a partner that could listen respectfully, that could hear you, that sees you as a separate individual, you might not be listening to this podcast. So you may not be someone who's actually considering divorce. So that's a good thing to remember, right? Part of the reason why you might be so afraid of this conversation is because the very conversations you've had throughout your marriage leading up to this conversation were so conflict-ridden, okay? So that's a key kind of distinction here. And actually, I would say the majority of the women that I work with, this is the situation that we find. I do want to caveat, though, that sometimes I will have women that I work with who really fear the reactions of their partners, and it actually doesn't pan out that way. In fact, in episode 106 on the podcast, the episode I entitled When Husbands Don't Lose Their Shit During Divorce, a success story. It's one of my favorites. It's actually an episode where I interview a woman from my Stay or Go community who had this exact experience. She was experiencing a lot of distress and fear about how the conversation was going to go down with her husband. There had been traumatic history in the marriage around him not handling things like this well. And actually, through a wild string of events, she actually filed ahead of time, so did not have the conversation until after she'd filed, which I do advise for women that are in situations like this. Sometimes it can be very protective if the door is already closed, it's already been filed, it can make it easier. There's not as much back and forth in them trying to convince you not to. In her case, though, she had already filed, and for some crazy reason in her state, they emailed her husband without letting her know that they were going to. So in this instance, she gets a text with her husband saying, "Hey, did you file for divorce today?" And contrary to her worst fears, he actually handled it very calmly. He asked if they could meet at a bar that evening. They met at the bar and discussed it. And he was able to sit down and be very focused on the kids. And that was shocking for all of us. I remember all of us in the community going through that experience when she shared and feeling the oh my gosh. And then the yay, wonderful success story of him being able to respectfully have that conversation and then move forward in ways that were best for their kids. So happy when that happens. Okay. I'm honestly in the rarer percentage of the women that I end up coaching and the way things typically go down. But because of that, I do want to say here at the beginning that if you are genuinely unsure, right, you're like, I don't know if my spouse is going to react that way or not, I do want to recommend straight out the gate at the beginning of this episode, getting on a 90-minute session with me to flesh out that past history in your marriage, to give you a better, more tailor-made route to this conversation that'll be just for you if you find yourself in that position. I'm always trying to remain both very aware of the overall patterns that I see, which I typically see, especially in the case of women married to men handling these conversations much more immature, very reactive, and very volatile. Of course, in the realm that I am working with, I coach women considering divorce specifically, and obviously women considering divorce typically, if they're considering, they may be married at a higher rate to more emotionally immature partners. But that's not the case for everybody. And if it's possibly not the case for you, like I said, come meet with me on a 90-minute. You can text 90MIN to 33777 so that we can tailor make this conversation so you can go in knowing more clearly based off of the past history, what might I be expecting going forward. Okay, now that I've kind of established that, because sometimes I feel like a fisher, like throwing out the net with this episode. It has to be generalized and kind of a broad reach. But there are some of you that will get pulled into that net who these ideas and this advice won't be exactly the fit for. So if you're noticing that, like I said, go work with me one-on-one. Now, for what I would offer is the majority of you that I think it will be more the case what our beautiful Kay is talking about in her email. There are 4 things in this episode that I really want you to know about in order to be ready for the conversation, okay? Because as I was thinking about this, and the first 3, the 4th is going to be the details of the conversation, but the first 3 are so important for just prepping you in advance for the conversation to even happen. And why I want to emphasize that, right? Out of 4 of these, 3 of them are just prep work. It's because for a lot of you, you are very focused on the conversation and thinking the conversation is going to change things or open things in a different way. And what I've found is it's more about the prep work, how ready you are for this conversation than it is necessarily how your partner's going to react. So let's dive into these things. Okay, so first piece that I want you to focus on when you are getting ready for this conversation is to get as many details and logistics sorted out for yourself beforehand. Okay? This is not the case for, most of us. I mean, this is the beauty of you getting to listen to this episode is hopefully this will give you a little bit of an edge. I would say nobody was telling me to do that before I had this conversation necessarily. Thankfully, I'd been in therapy, so I was doing a lot of that work naturally. But why? Why do I want you to get as many details and logistics sorted before you go in? It's because when you have done some research ahead of time around perhaps, what is divorce like in my state? What are the separation requirements? There are certain states where you have to be separated for an entire year before you can actually even file for divorce. I have a woman in my community that's in one of those states. We've been watching her go through a separation for this whole year. When you know your rights in your specific state, when you have used AI to help you understand a little bit better what the logistics are of your situation, and it's been able to help you strategize and think through potential options for yourself, especially in the case of a separation, right? Okay, financially, would I be able to move into an apartment? I'm thinking back to my own separation where it was like I lived in the house during the week because the kids were home, and he was staying in a hotel during the week. And then on the weekends, he would come home and I would go stay in Airbnbs. I had taken some time to think out logistically. I actually did it with a best friend at the time, what might work around a separation. When you do that, you give yourself a bit more of a foundation to be less thrown off by your partner when they start coming at you with any type of emotional fear-mongering during the conversation, okay? Which I want you to be prepared for because I see that very, very, very common. When we are having a conversation with our partner about wanting a separation or a divorce, and our partner does not want that, for most partners, they go into a fear response, and you are going to see them throwing out all kinds of things, reacting with anger, reacting with sadness, reacting with their own fear. As much as possible, you being able to have your own grounded space in that conversation, being able to maybe present some clear ideas. I was thinking we could do this. I know there are some options for mediation that look like this. Depending, of course, I'll talk about this a little bit later on how your partner reacts and the extent to which they react. That can really help you to get less pulled out into the crazy of their reaction. Okay. And that's something that, I would offer. I think a lot of you are already doing, maybe thinking, okay, this or this, but I want you to actually go in with like, what are some concrete ideas for myself on how I can make this work? I've been watching some women in the community doing this recently, and it's beautiful to watch as they really honestly think about their partners, especially if they know, like, my partner's pretty volatile, probably not going to be okay with any of this, starting to explore other options. Okay, could I have a conversation with my parents ahead of time? Would I be able to talk perhaps to my in-laws about what's going to be happening? All beautiful groundwork that is being laid before you actually have this conversation. So I want you to get those details, logistics, groundwork, as much of it sorted for yourself as you can before you move into the conversation. Now, second piece, okay? The second piece is knowing that depending on the emotional maturity of your partner, this may not be a one and done kind of conversation. Okay? And why it may not be a one and done kind of conversation is because for it to be finally done, like this conversation to reach an ending, you may have to be the one that finally is ready to call it. Now, here's what I mean by that. I see for many of us, women especially, going into these conversations, we come in really hopeful at the beginning that there will be able to be some kind of understanding reached, that we will be heard, that we will be understood, that if we can just communicate enough, our partner will eventually realize this is what's best for us and let us leave. What I see most commonly, though, is that currently, in the world that we live in, there are lots of men out there who don't want to be the ones to initiate the divorce. And that's, speaking specifically about a heterosexual marriage in the patriarchal world that we live in. I have been shocked, as have a lot of the women that I have coached, at the levels that men in our world will go to stay in marriages that they are unhappy in as well. I'm thinking specifically of a couple of women in my community lately that are like, he like one even specifically shared her husband admitting how unhappy he is, that he actually enjoys when she is out of town and she is not around, yet he will not call it. Yet he can stand there and say, I'm happier when you're not here, and I am not going to leave you. This is the commitment I made. I am in. Now, it's really important that you know this. For all my sweet little first timers out there, this is your first marriage. This is the first time you've been considering divorce. And you may be coming to it from a more logical standpoint, like I did, like lots of the women I see of, okay, if you're that miserable, if you're happier when I'm not here, then surely let's just call it, right? Let's just both agree this is not a fit. Why do we see so many men being willing to stay in marriages that they are unhappy with. And for that, I'm going to direct you back to the 2 amazing episodes I did with my bestie Quinn from Gerda Lerner's work. Those were episodes 110 and 111. I think a lot of people have missed them. I feel like I did not title them very well, but the first one is What Every Woman Deserves to Know. And the second one, I think, is about why men get to succeed and women get exhausted. If you have not listened to those and you are one of my babes that is very hopeful that somehow your spouse will be able to admit that he is unhappy as well, I want you to go listen to those, because in those episodes is where you will get to have the breakdown around realizing that within a patriarchal world, men get benefits from just being married. Benefits that for you are not the same. They get a certain status by being married in a patriarchal world, and they also get the unpaid emotional and physical labor that you are providing within that dynamic. I'm going to have my assistant, she'll be linking all of these episodes down below so they're easy for you to click over to for more research. But I'm also going to have her linking an Instagram post I came across the other day. It was so good, y'all. I've actually thought I need to reach out and maybe do a collab with her or an episode, because she was breaking down like the unpaid labor of men in marriage and the unpaid labor of women. And it was shocking. I think it was like a $99,000 difference per year. So you have to see yourself within the bigger system. You have to see you. And if you are married to a man, you have to see him. Now, if you are in a marriage as a woman with another woman, those dynamics are going to be different. It's not the same patriarchal benefits. And I would say they apply more to, I'm like, this is where the 90-minute comes in. This is where I would be able to drop into more of, why is perhaps my partner wanting to stay even when we're deeply unhappy. That's where you're going to want to get back into disorganized attachment and attachment styles and CPTSD and our trauma from childhood. And perhaps, where each partner falls on the codependent to narcissistic spectrum. That's the deeper pieces there. But the key in these instances is that you have a partner who, when you are coming and saying, I don't think this is what I want anymore, they are not able to hear you in that moment. And you end up falling into this cycle where it gets brought up, but then you're going to cycle back to normal. And then it's going to come up again, and then you're going to cycle back to normal, along with varying degrees of emotional outbursts from your partner. So that's why I said the second piece is understanding that as much as you may believe a conversation about a separation is going to lead to a decision to separate, or a conversation about a divorce is going to lead forward to actually making the decision to get divorced, depending on the emotional immaturity of your partner, you may have to, if you start seeing yourself having to have this conversation over and over and over and again, and it's just ending up with a standstill with your partner, you are eventually going to have to be the one to call it. If you are the one that wants the separation and the divorce and they do not, and they are willing to stonewall that conversation, emotionally freak out, keep doing cycles, you will eventually have to be the one that steps forward and makes that decision. And why I'm especially emphasizing that here in this second part is because, going back to Kay's email, so many of us feel so much stress about that initial conversation, about bringing it up the first time. And I think it can help if we realistically realize, depending on your partner, this is going to be brought up multiple times. There's going to be a whole process and a journey that happens for both sides, right? But definitely maybe releasing some of the pressure that we feel on this first conversation. What I've seen more commonly is, especially for women that have partners that are not open to this, is the conversation's going to have to happen over and over and over until you are ready. And that's just the beautiful part of it. I don't want there to be any shame about not being ready, like straight out the gate to go. Sometimes every bit of that helps you, as I'm going to talk about later, to learn more and more about who your partner really is, to see more clearly what your partner is capable of and what they're not capable of. Okay, the third piece that I want you to understand comes from the book that I am going to recommend most for those of you freaking out about this conversation, Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People by Lindsay Gibson. I have talked about this book quite a bit on the podcast. But if you are specifically like, I don't want to have this conversation because I know there's going to be a ton of conflict, you are probably in the group of having a very emotionally immature partner, and you really want to be ready for how this conversation is probably not going to go the way you expect. This book will take you there. And I want to read this quote from chapter 42, where she says, "How can I get through to them?" Which is, I think, what a lot of you are asking me when you're like, how I just want to know how to say the wording. I just want to make sure I can stay really calm. And that's why my heart just like goes out to you, because I know, like she's going to say here, that with emotionally immature people, it is very difficult to, if not impossible for some of them, to get through to them. And this is why. She says, "You might have been hopeful that better communication skills would improve your relationship with an EIP and bring you closer. But you may have been disappointed. EIPs approach interactions in ways that make communication difficult at best, if not, as I just said, downright impossible." Now, this next paragraph is key. If there is like nothing else that you're going to take from this episode, which I know my listeners, you're going to take a lot from this episode, but let this paragraph land specifically. Lindsay Gibson says, "The effectiveness of your communication is only as good as your listener's willingness to engage, and this willingness will be limited in EIPs. When a person wants to understand you, it doesn't matter how you say it. It's equally true that if a person doesn't want to understand you, it also doesn't matter how you say it. You can't unilaterally succeed in getting your point across to someone who isn't interested. The most skilled communicator in the world fails in the presence of a closed mind, or a mind that just doesn't see things the same way." Oh, my babes. Okay, for so many of you that are in dynamics with EIPs, this is where I see you get hung up on this loop. Definitely if you are one of these people, go read this book, because you need to start understanding it is not a you thing. We internalize and think that we are the problem, that we are the one that is not communicating correctly or well, which, by the way, this was me 100%. And I learned this from my mother, because my mother was an EIP who could not understand me. And so as a child, I constantly felt like I needed to be explaining myself, always feeling misunderstood. That carried over into my marriage. And what that really led to was a lot of over-investing in communication at the expense of realizing I was not actually being heard. And I was spending all of this energy in trying to figure out, like Kay said, how to word it correctly, how to try and stay calm. And this is the biggest takeaway for this third little section here, is what I really want your energy going towards is grieving and accepting that there's nothing you can say that will make your decision to get separated or divorced less crazy for your partner. Yeah, that is a tough one for many of us, especially for those of us that come from, we have a more codependent personality. We've learned how to move through the world by trying to control others' emotions with our behaviors. So we think if we can just be enough of this, then they will finally feel this way. If I can just communicate this way, they'll be able to hear that I want to get a separation or I want to get divorced, and be able to feel calm during it. So important to realize that emotionally immature people, and I will say especially partners that are more narcissistically inclined. I'll have Alex include, I can't think of that episode off the top of my head, but I'll have Alex include the episode as well. I've done an episode, one of my favorite ones, about the codependent narcissistic spectrum that we all kind of fall along, or at least many of us that come from backgrounds, where we did not get secure attachment with our parents. With partners that are more narcissistically inclined, you just have to realize that they have learned how to externalize. They tend to be more externally focused, and so they believe that people and things outside of them need to change in order to fit their view or make them feel better. So you, as a more potentially codependent partner, you've learned to internalize. You've learned to believe, oh, if I change myself, I really can make the external feel a different way. That's where this dynamic, especially in conversations like this, is really going to bite you in the butt. Because if you do have a more narcissistically traded partner, and I say that once, I want to keep emphasizing this on the podcast, that I'm like, I don't think that narcissists, the majority of the narcissistically traded, narcissistically inclined partners that I see with women in my community, they are not doing this maliciously or consciously, but it's still a huge thing to understand, because you as their partner, as the more codependent, you take the brunt of a partner believing externally you should change to make them feel better. And boy, will that be the case if you are coming forward saying you want a separation or divorce, and that is the exact opposite of the reality that your partner wants to live in. And for partners like that, depending on what, how far out on the spectrum they go, they do not typically handle loss of control well. Okay, the farther out you flow on that spectrum on the narcissistic end, and she'll talk about this, by the way, with emotionally immature people at the end of the book. She has a couple appendices that are so helpful. She literally lists out, like, what are the traits of emotionally immature people? And she talks about how emotionally immature people typically view other people as parts of themselves. They don't see them as separate individuals. Boy, will that become very clear to you in a conversation about wanting a separation or a divorce from your spouse. If your spouse cannot wrap their head around the fact that you get to leave, that you do not have to stay, that you are unhappy, and that you get to seek a divorce, it will show you the level to which your partner is more narcissistically inclined. Now, another thing to be aware of, here's where we're really getting into, right? Like, how I want you to be prepared for how it may go down once the conversation is happening. Over and over lately, I keep seeing that for many partners who are not ready for this conversation, they have not been tracking with you. It doesn't mean you haven't been communicating, okay? That's another thing we internalize, like, oh, they freak out. I can't believe you feel this way. You haven't, this is coming out of the blue. Please realize that is not an accurate representation for many of you of what's been happening in the marriage. Often when I drop into 90 minutes with clients, I will see that there has been multiple instances and moments throughout the marriage where this has been communicated, where frustration and upset, and your partner has not been able to hear you. Because of their own stuff, they have not been listening. They have not wanted to hear what you're saying. And so when we get to the point finally of a conversation of, I want a separation, I want to get divorced, what you are going to see is your partner moving through pretty rapidly and often in some pretty extreme ways the various stages of grief. And I don't even want to say moving through them, because it really looks like ping pong most of the time. So the stages of grief, by the way, for those of you that don't know, are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. And I want to be very clear that some partners will never ultimately reach acceptance. That, I think, is one of the tragedies of, I do see this as an effect of patriarchy, because historically, men have been able to own women and women haven't been able to actually leave. So their ability, the amount of practice they have had with having to accept that a woman gets to leave a marriage because she wants to is underdeveloped. Let's just say that. So I don't even really count acceptance in some. Let me just say it's something that I see less frequently. Partners that can really move into acceptance, it often takes years post the divorce, and sometimes for some of them, never. What you will see, though, in this conversation, possibly while you're going through it, and then definitely afterwards in those cycles that may start happening, is your partner ping-ponging through denial, believing it's not happening, getting very, we can fix this, we can save this, let's go to therapy, I love you, love bombing you, all of that. I would see that down in the denial. And then vacillating very quickly into anger. How could you do this to us? You're destroying our family, all of that. Then into bargaining. I would say bargaining probably is a little bit more of the let's go to therapy. I can change this. This can be better. Depression, where they start pulling away from people, where they are crying a lot. You walk outside and they're sad and they're wanting you to comfort them. It can be a lot. Okay. This moment of watching your partner go 1 minute angry, 1 minute depressed, next day in complete denial, acting like nothing's happened. Okay. This is why when women are coming to me and they're like, I want to get ready for this conversation, I'm like, yeah, it's not so much about the conversation. It's being ready for how your partner may react and understanding. Okay. Because this is where, especially if you fall on the codependent side, you get sucked into wanting to fix those feelings for them, wanting to help them through the depression, wanting to maybe, try to talk them out of the anger, wanting them to understand your point of view. It's so important to realize that they get to have their experience of grief. And why I want you to, and when I say that they get to have their experience of grief, I mean, do not go in and be trying to fix these feelings. Okay. I would offer us trying to fix those feelings for so long is often the reason we're now getting divorced, because our partners have not learned how to be emotionally mature and grow up and adult around their emotions. And trying now to fix those emotions for them is not going to help. This is a process of grief that they need to go through. And it is a grief on their end. Many of us that feel like it is a relief, we want to get divorced because it hasn't been great. Maybe it doesn't feel like grief to us, and we want them to just be able to leave with both of us feeling happy. No, it's understanding for your partner. It may very well be grief, and they need to feel and experience this. And on your end, when you can see these different layers, oh, there's the bargaining, there's the denial, there's the anger, you can take it less personally. Okay. And you can set appropriate, clear boundaries. I am not going to stand here and listen to you tell me how horrible I am and that I'm tearing apart the family. That you need to go talk to somebody else about that. Do you see how even the question of I want to be able to have the correct wording and to be calm. Within that, what I want so much more is for you to be ready for your partner to not hear you at all and to not be calm at all, and to know that's okay. You can still walk out of the room. You can still, I've had to have instances where women, as they prep for this conversation, are ready to say, I have a couple of friends that know I'm having this conversation, and if you can't stop yelling, I'm going to need to leave and go hang out with them. That, I think, is the biggest piece that so many women miss. Nobody tells us ahead of time how volatile it may get as our partner goes through these stages of grief. And so we're not prepared or ready to shut that down and disengage, to divest, to say, no, you're not going to treat me that way. One of the things I've loved seeing in the community lately is how much women that are in couples therapy are using couples therapy as the place to have this conversation. And I actually, depending on the therapist that you have, if you have a therapist that is actually in support of both people getting what they want more than therapists that are like, we must save the marriage at all costs. which you'll get the range in marriage therapy, I have seen this be very effective because when you have a third party there that can say, no, you don't get to, come after her like that. We're not going to villainize her. We need to keep respect in the room. That can be very supportive. I'm also thinking of how, partners after this conversation going through the bargaining. This is the coming in at 10 o'clock at night, super activated and depressed, begging you to talk to them. And when you can have the clear adult space of, I have work tomorrow, we're not going to discuss this right now. We can have this at a time that's appropriate. And if your partner continues, it's okay. I don't want to do this, but I am going to have to go to a hotel. I'm going to have to go to my parents' house tonight because this is not okay, especially if you have children in the house for me or the kids. Knowing that could happen and being ready for it makes such a difference. That's the piece I would have loved somebody to have prepped me for. I also want to be clear because some of you will experience this. So in extreme cases, probably about 5% of the women I have met, actually, I want to say it might be more than that, 5 to 10, maybe 15%. I have seen spouses that will mention hurting themselves. And I know I've talked about this in the podcast before, how important it is to handle that in a very adult way. If your spouse, with you coming in and having a conversation of, I want to get divorced, if they start talking about suicide or wanting to kill themselves, you do not allow that to become an emotional drama. Oh my gosh, right? You handle that calmly and you say, then we need to call a helpline right now. I want to get you the help that you need. That's very serious. I'm very concerned about you. Very, very important piece. I wish that so many more women knew that because it in a small instance, I actually have, it's very sad to say, but I have had, I'm thinking of one woman I coached specifically whose husband did actually move forward and commit suicide. And there's so many other pieces to that, right? I mean, there was a lot in that marriage leading up to that moment. In ways that were much bigger than I think their relationship even. But for a greater portion of you, it is a brain trying to to get you back through extreme means. Through I would offer like emotional blackmail. Okay, it's very scary to have somebody say they might kill themselves if you end up divorcing them. And as much as possible, you don't want to play into that. You want to be ready and prepared for that and able to just calmly say, okay, if you really feel that way, then we need to get you some medical professional help. And from there, I would say regardless, especially in that instance, I would reach out to your in-laws. Hey, we had this conversation. He mentioned this. I'm very concerned about him. You need to get outside help. Now, like I said, that's in about 5, 10, maybe 15% of the women that I'm talking to. More often what I would say in like including that 15%, but probably going out to like a 20 to 30%, you're going to have spouses that talk about how destabilizing this is, maybe in the weeks following, how their mental health is struggling. I mentioned last week, right? The husband who's like, I can't focus at work because you won't tell me what is going to happen. I can't live in this limbo, which I want to read this quote too, going back to the disentangling from emotionally immature people, because this was key. In that same chapter 42, she says, EIPs crave certainty and clear answers. They want things settled, not open up for consideration, and they have zero interest in considering different angles. They want to skip the emotional, relational stuff and get back to their certainties as quickly as possible. That's what I see very often. Partners who want as much as possible to just make things go back. How do we get things back to normal? How do we get it back to what it was previously without understanding we are past the point of being able to go back? And for partners like that, it is very important to have this book because when you want to get into the nitty-gritty of like, how do I handle a partner like this? In this book, she has multiple sections, but the three that I loved the most were she has a part 3 that's all about stepping back, which is going to be key. Like I just said, stepping back. I'm not here to be emotionally managing or helping you through these stages of grief. Her part 4 is saving yourself. And part 5 is solving problems. Okay. What I've seen is once we have these conversations, there tends to be a lot of escalation that happens afterwards. Okay. Especially with emotionally immature partners, they don't know how to regulate themselves. So you want to be really ready to weather the storm. So for you, Kay, specifically asking me, like, I want to be ready. Like, what am I going to say? How do I stay calm? You're going to go get this book and you're going to read through specifically 3, 4, and 5, those sections for sure, so that you have a better idea of what to be expecting from your partner. Now, with those 3 areas established, okay, just to recap for us, the first one was that I want you to get as many details and logistics sorted for yourself as possible ahead of time. The next is to realize that as much as you think this is going to be the big one, the one conversation that you're going to have, there is a good chance that this will actually be many conversations, and that ultimately, depending on which you'll realize, you will see after you have this conversation, if you keep having multiple conversations, that you may have to be the one that just eventually calls it. Your partner may not be willing to leave on equal footing of, okay, this isn't a good fit, you're unhappy, let's end this marriage. So the second one is you may have to call it ultimately. And the third one is that you are going to need to possibly grieve and accept that there is not going to be a way to do this that will be any less crazy. Your partner may just be someone who cannot go through this process without being volatile, creating a lot of conflict and crazy. And if that's the case, good to know. You want to be prepped and ready to step back into adulthood, to set boundaries, which I know so many of you are like, please don't make me. And I'm like, babe, this is the work, okay? This is the gym. This is the part that if you tend towards the codependent side, every bit of learning how to do this, going through the divorce, is what helps you post-divorce. You're going to be working on this the rest of your life, but as much as you want to avoid this, as much as you wish there was an easy way out, as I said on last week's episode, there's nobody coming to save you. This is what ultimately takes you through the process and the journey. Setting boundaries, learning how to speak up for yourself, learning how to let someone else say horrible things about you, think horrible things about you while staying grounded in your own reality. Now, with those 3 things recapped, let's just real quickly, let me just give you a little outline for the conversation, because I know that's what you all are wanting, even though I'm like, it's so much bigger than that. Here is a little bit of the outline for the conversation. And I have one golden rule for you going into this conversation, which is that when you are thinking of what you are going to say, I want everything you are saying to be for you, purely for you. I do not want you saying things hoping that the other person will hear you, understand you, change their mind. Okay? And when we do this, when we go in knowing I am saying these things for me and me alone, the conversation ends up already being a win from the very start, because you are not doing it in order to get a certain reaction or emotion from someone else. You are doing it for you. And then no matter how that person reacts, you will have said what you wanted to say, whether they hear you or not. And let me emphasize that this is where the real power starts to come from, especially with emotionally immature partners. You getting grounded in, I have said what I need to say, whether they can hear it or not, is the key. That is where conversations start to lead to the next steps, to being able to step forward, to say the next thing, to do the next thing, regardless of the emotional freakouts that your partner is having. Now, another piece that I want for you is along with that, right? Of, okay, everything you're saying, you are saying it just for yourself. I also want you to go in knowing why you are wanting to have this conversation. Okay. So if you are like, yes, I know I want to have this conversation because I'm ready to have a separation or I am ready for a divorce. I want you to know that. I also want you to know if you are going in thinking you are having this conversation for a separation, but really being honest with yourself as you check in, seeing that, oh, I'm actually bringing up separation, but I still deep down am wanting to have them understand me. I'm wanting to have him or her hear me. If that's the case, totally okay. Just notice that. Notice why you are having this conversation. And if it really is, I'm still trying to see if they can understand me, if they can hear me, don't come down hard on yourself when you're not able to stick clearly with like, and we move into a separation or, and now we're filing for divorce. It just means you're at the stage where you're still really hopeful. And like I said at the beginning, for some of you, that absolutely may be the case. You may be in a space where you have not been communicating openly or clearly with your partners. We all have our own pieces from childhood, right? Maybe you didn't feel safe. Maybe you have struggled. Maybe you have more an avoidant attachment style and you have not been clear and honest with your partner. And you're just wanting to see what will happen when you do. Beautiful. And I would offer that this is for most women a big part of the process. Remember where I talked earlier about like kind of having to shed our illusions about our partners, kind of having to realize how much is what I'm hoping our marriage will become based on just a healing fantasy and hope rather than reality. It can take multiple interactions like this with more and more awareness on your part, which is what this episode is all about. I would say that the difficult part is without having this episode framing out for you what I want you looking for, you can end up having these conversations over and over without really starting to see more clearly. But with these pieces, my hope is that each conversation, you get more and more aware of where your partner actually falls in the, in the codependent narcissistic spectrum, on the levels of emotional immaturity to maturity. And you start to really get honest about how much your partner actually loves you for you, actually understands you, actually wants you to have what you need, versus says they love you because they want to keep what you are in their life and what you being married to them means to them. Those are very different things. And if you're at the beginning of, having these conversations, there may be multiple conversations where you're going to start seeing more and more on that. If that is the case for you, where you start to notice, oh, I think it's more the second one. I think my partner doesn't really know and love me for me, but rather what I provide for them. You really want to keep coming back, as I said earlier, to that golden rule of I'm having conversations not for them to change their mind or understand me, but for me to communicate what I am feeling and what I want, not for them to ultimately agree with or understand me. Okay, so that's the golden rule. That's the first piece. Next thing I want you to remember is to keep conversations short and goal-directed. Okay, especially for moments like this where we may have partners that are not on the same page. And to facilitate that, to staying kind of short and more goal-directed, I'm going to refer us all back to nonviolent communication. Last summer, I did an entire summer camp around nonviolent communication. That's how important it is. And for those of you that are like, nonviolent communication, I don't even know what this is, highly recommend joining the Stay or Go community. We have both of the workshops that I did last summer over there from that. And we also just had another workshop done by a phenomenal community member back in July that is also in our extra resources. So if you are like, nonviolent communication, what does this mean? Text Stay or Go community, all one word, to 33777 and go drop in over there to start learning about it. Not to mention, of course, being in the community while you have this conversation is tremendously helpful. I haven't even talked about that piece yet, but it is huge having other women to support you, especially if you have a partner that's going to be more emotionally volatile. But in NVC, what I love so much about it is it helps kind of break down a conversation into 4 main steps, which helps us with the keeping the conversation short and goal oriented. So those 4 steps in NVC are observation, feeling, what we need, and making a request. Okay. And boy, will this help you staying grounded in yourself during the conversation. So I'm not going to go into these in depth. Like I said, if you want to learn more, go join the Stay or Go community, watch the workshops there. But briefly, the first piece is just focusing on the observation, which is just what are the plain facts of what you've seen or heard. And I'll give an example of this right after this. But we start with an observation. This is not, you did this, blah, 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 blah. It's just, hey, here's what's happening. Then we share our feeling, the emotion you are experiencing because of what's been happening. Then we focus on our need. Because I'm feeling this is what I'm needing. And finally, we end it with a request. So thinking specifically of Kay for this email, I was like, here is a good example of a short way to have this conversation, to begin this conversation. I would say, starting with an observation, the past 5 years of our marriage, okay, so past 5 years, now my feeling. I have felt sad and unhappy. Now I'm going to bring in the need because I need deeper emotional connection. Now I'm going to layer this one a little bit with another observation. When I've tried to bring this up with you in the past, now I bring in my feeling, I've felt scared and powerless. And because of that, now I bring in my need. I need space. Now my request. Would you be willing to do a separation for 1 month? Okay. Also, you can also add into that, where it's like, when I've tried to bring this up with you in the past, I felt scared and powerless. And because of that, I want a divorce. Would you be willing to do this amicably through mediation? Just notice, as I said those words, as I said this conversation, if this conversation feels absolutely terrifying to you, if your body is activated right now from me saying these words and you thinking of saying them to your spouse, just want you to notice that. That's some really good information right there. Okay. And I want to offer that it's likely a couple things. I'm sure it can be more, but I was thinking specifically of 2 things. The first one, like I've mentioned, it may be that you truly haven't discussed your feelings this honestly with your partner. And, really, I think as women, we are definitely trained not to communicate like this. We are not trained to share our feelings clearly, to attach them to what we are actually needing, and then to ask for what we need. And so communicating in this way may feel much more blunt or direct than you are used to. And if that is the case, if you really have not been communicating how you are feeling, I want to say, great. This is the best time to start building that skill of communication right now. Because when I think of relationships that work, a huge piece of them are because of communication. Communication is one of the most fundamental and important pieces of connection. And so if you are noticing that that is a part that you have not been able to show up for, you have been hiding how much you feel this, that is not going to magically change with a partner in the future. Okay? It can get easier for sure. This is this intricate balancing act of both acknowledging our part in the dynamic of the marriage and also seeing how much our partner has been a part of it. So here's where I'm trying to say once again, there may be definitely parts on your side where you have not been communicating clearly, and it may not even be that it's because your partner has been emotionally volatile. You may have your own trauma around this. And there also is a lot of you where you have been communicating and your partner is so emotionally volatile that you don't feel like you can say it anymore. So just know it is probably one of those two things. If it is the first one, jump on a 90-minute with me. Let's see if we can figure out and parse out for you and okay, where are we landing? And if it is the second one, where you have an emotionally volatile partner who has totally lost their shit on you when you have brought stuff like this up previously, then I want you to go back to number one and make sure that you are ready with your plan. Okay? You really want to be ready with what are the next steps. If you end up having this conversation and as I've prepped you guys, if your partner goes straight into emotionally and verbally trying to manipulate and abuse you, turning you into the villain, you want to be ready with the next steps from there. Because ultimately, my loves, even with me giving you this, framework of how to do this, how to make an observation, share your feeling, state your need, and then make a request, we have to keep remembering that no amount of communication can work if the person you're trying to communicate with does not want to hear what you are saying. That just is the reality of where at this day and age, at this point in human history, where conversations around separation and divorce tend to fall. At this time in human consciousness, we unfortunately seem to have a lot of partners that are so not ready to hear that because of their own stuff, right? I want to be very clear too that when we have a partner that cannot hear that we are hurting, that we are unhappy, that we want something else, that needs us to stay at all costs, even our own mental and physical health, that is not about us. That is about someone else needing to do their work. And for those of us that fall in that camp where your partner just they cannot accept this reality, I really want to emphasize the importance of you having people to go through what's going to come out of this with you. This is where my deep dive 3-month coaching container is the best, because this is where I really walk through each and every bit of this process with you at the same time, which is huge because we need somebody standing beside us saying, when I'm telling you in these conversations, I want you to step back. I want you to trust yourself. Sometimes we need somebody holding our hand being like, it's okay. He's saying things because he's hurt. She's saying things because she doesn't want to lose you. And it's not because she really knows you, right? Those are so important to have people we love, that love us, that know us, that see the hurt we've been going through, that see how the dynamics are no longer supportive for us and can stand next to us, reminding us, even though this person is perhaps losing their shit right now, you get to keep trusting yourself. Even though they are calling you names, even though they are telling you the worst possible things are going to come out of this, you get to keep trusting yourself. This is another reason I love the Stay or Go community, because having a group of women who are also going through the same things and are choosing, I am not going to abandon myself and my truth to make this person happy right now. I'm going to let them have their feelings. Having other women doing that at the same time, where you're seeing it and you're like, oh yeah, I see her. I know she's amazing. I know who she is. And her spouse is currently demonizing her for making this decision, helps your brain go, it may not be about me. It may be that this person, like a scared animal backed into a corner, does not want to lose something that they are not ready to lose, and they will fight tooth and nail to keep it, even if it means damaging me and making me sacrifice my relationship with myself. I want to finish up this episode by first acknowledging those of you coming to this episode being like, yes, she's going to give me a script for this conversation. And then receiving the script I just gave you where you're like, what? Where's all the defending myself? Where's all the, I just want to remind and direct you back to the first 3 things out of my list of 4, right? As much as you think it is about the conversation and what you're going to say, it's not. It's about you being ready to know what your truth is and weather the storms that may come from a partner who's not ready to hear your truth. And I want to give you a couple of examples of ways that you may, like routes that you just may have to take. I watched one this week with a woman in my community who really started these conversations at the beginning of this year, I would say. So these conversations have been ongoing this year, and finally realized this week that, talk about a process of going the rounds and steadily, bit by bit, realizing more and more, coming into reality of where her partner actually is at on the level of emotional immaturity, and taking the big step this week of realizing, okay, I need to reach out and get help and support from my in-laws. In her case, she has in-laws that sound like they have a better understanding of some of the mental health challenges with their son, are supportive of her. I was just so excited when I heard that, but great example of finally reaching a point where you realize, okay, just keeping this between me and my spouse isn't working. They just continue to dig their heels in and keep, going through the stages of grief, but not moving anywhere nearer to acceptance. Another example I wanted to use is in my own marriage. I think I was a great just example of so many of you. That's why I relate so much when you guys message me or email me or reach out to me. I'm like, yes, I remember what this felt like. Having been raised with the mother that I was raised with, and then going straight from there when I was 19 into my marriage, I definitely internalized and thought I was the problem with the communication. And thankfully, through the support of my therapist, she helped me start to realize it wasn't that I couldn't communicate. It's that, especially in the relationship with my mother, I was speaking to someone who couldn't actually listen and hear me. And as I learned that around my mother, and I built up, abilities to have boundaries with her, abilities to take care of myself first, to not over prioritize her, I learned some of the skills that were so important in helping me move into the next level of my growth. My growth was very much an onion. It was like waking up to the abuse from my mom and developing boundaries there, then the religion, and eventually it was seeing those same dynamics in my marriage. And I was able to have the conversation and communicate about a separation, which we were able to actually do. But then while we were in the separation, there was a lot of escalation and crazy behaviors that happened. And it was like rapid fire. Oh my goodness. Whoa, this is actually where we're at. And I'm really proud of myself that by that point, instead of continuing to have more conversations, I went and met with an attorney and filed for divorce. And the next conversation I had was hey, similar to the MVC, because all of this happened and I'm feeling betrayed, freaked out, and my trust is broken, and I need to be in a marriage where I can trust my partner. It wasn't even a request. It was I have filed for divorce and we're getting divorced. And why I'm sharing that example is for many of you, that is where it may have to land. It may have to move to the space of it's no longer a request. If you have a partner that cannot, that is not safe enough to talk to, if you have a partner that goes into the volatility of spending money that is your joint money, starts to make poor financial decisions, starts to lose his job, you have to ultimately step up and do what's best for you. And especially in the case of having children, what is best for them. And at that point, it becomes staying in this environment of I'm unhappy, maybe we're separating, divorce is on the table, but you're watching your partner's mental health just spiral, inability to not have volatile conversations in front of the children. You get to step up, babe, and I know you can. I really want to reassure each and every one of you that you can do this. You can, if your partner, as you go through this process, really starts to spiral, you can step up and call it and make the decision, just like I did, to file and move forward with the process. Because at that point, it was like a part of me understood, yes, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but at least in filing at that point, every ounce and bit of time was going towards an actual ending. When we haven't filed, that's when we get into the space of these conversations going over and over and over and over for years. I've seen this with women that I've worked with where both partners' mental health may be deteriorating because we're just staying in the limbo. So be very ready to see clearly what is unfolding before you. For many of you, this conversation is just going to be the part that starts to set off all the other pieces that will come after it. And to especially remember that as much as you have focused on what you're going to say, this is more so about an opportunity to see if your partner is willing to listen and hear you. Because if not, there's no amount of communication that is going to change that. There just isn't. To be able to be emotionally mature, to be able to be respectful, and to have conversations where you can emotionally regulate, it takes deep personal work to do that, to hold space for yourself and another, especially when that other is saying something that maybe you don't want to hear. That is not the kind of work that gets done while we're in the process of freaking out about our spouse wanting to leave us and being unhappy and wanting a divorce. And that's where a lot of us, we're like, oh, can this person change right now in the middle of this? You will get to see. You'll get to see, are these changes because this person's really genuinely wanting to do the deeper work to hear and see me? Or are they doing this because they're really afraid of losing something that they don't want to lose? As someone who personally, those of you that have listened to the podcast for a long time, right? You guys know I think one of the most wounding and difficult things in my life was being raised with a mother who really couldn't listen to or hear the people around her. And because of that, I did not know how important it was for me to feel heard, to feel deeply known and seen and understood. And now that I have been divorced and I'm with my partner, Joe, I have to say it is night and day. It is night and day to be in a relationship with someone who actually listens and hears me naturally. And I now know that it is a absolute non-negotiable for me. Top of the list for me in any relationship has to be that my partner naturally is able to hear me, that it is not a struggle or a battle for them to understand me, to understand how I'm feeling, to understand what I need. It's so fundamental to me in being able to feel emotional closeness and trust with a partner. And for many of us, in my instance, I'd never experienced that in my home life. Therefore, I couldn't know that I wasn't experiencing that fully in my marriage. And it wasn't until I got divorced and met someone who is a sea creature, like me, I don't know any other way to say that, is emotionally mature enough to be able to have complex and beautifully nuanced conversations. It's only in knowing that now that I'm like, oh, yeah, that is the absolute prerequisite for me in feeling emotional closeness. And so I just want to say that for so many of you that may, similar to me, been raised in environments like this, gone straight into a marriage like this, you may never have known what it actually feels like to be heard, to be truly listened to and understood. And I just want to say that you deserve that. You deserve that. I believe we all do. I think it is one of the core wounds for many of us in childhood, not being seen, not being understood. And it's, in a lot of ways, a tragedy, in my opinion, for those of us that go on to marry partners like that and then stay in those marriages unknowingly, not realizing there are people out there that can just be a better match for you, that are just more securely attached, that are just more emotionally mature, that are just a sea lion rather than a giraffe. It absolutely is possible. And I just want to say here at the end, for those of you that are like, I don't know that about myself. That's what the 90 minutes are for. You don't have to figure this out alone. You can text 90MIN to 33777. That's what I am skilled at. That's what I love doing with women, is helping drop in with them about the history in their marriage and really helping them craft and figure out, what am I wanting? What has my partner shown up as so far? Where are things at right now? And I think one of the things that I do the best on those 90 minutes is really helping you see, based off of what you're wanting, the level of what you're wanting, where your partner has been at historically and where they are at now, what's the amount of work that would take, and just being honest with yourself about that. Because I feel passionately about us as women living the life that is ours to live and having lives that match the values that we feel most deeply around. And like I just said, being heard, being seen by my partner is now one of the very top values that I have when it comes to a relationship. And it's something that I want for any and all women that, are currently in relationship dynamics where you don't feel that way, but are hoping that it's possible and want to feel that way. I am an example that it is, and that it is worth it. All right, my loves, special shout out to Kay again on this episode. Thank you for your email. I love getting to hear from y'all. I love getting to hear specifically what you're needing. It helps me direct my episodes. It always helps me to know that you're out there, that you're listening, that this is having an impact. And for those of you coming off of this episode feeling like, okay, it's time for that conversation, know that I am sending you all the love, all the grounding, all the deep breaths. Remind yourself, you can do this. You can trust yourself. I'll see y'all next week.